What if I told you that the most powerful woman in Ottoman history was once a slave? That a girl who was kidnapped, chained, and sold like property eventually ruled an empire that stretched across 3 continents? That the sultans, the viziers, the generals, the entire political machinery of one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen, was quietly, carefully, brilliantly controlled by a woman who wasn't even supposed to exist in the history books? And what if I told you that the men who underestimated her, every single one of them, ended up destroyed? This is her story. Nobody knows exactly when she was born. Nobody knows her real name. That alone should tell you everything about how the world saw her. A girl so unimportant, so invisible, so disposable that history didn't even bother to record the day she arrived in it. Historians believe she was born somewhere around 1502 or 1505 in a small town called Rohatin, in a region that is modern-day Ukraine. She was the daughter of an Orthodox Christian priest. She grew up in a quiet village, surrounded by green hills and church bells, and the simple rhythms of a small, peaceful life. She had a name, probably Alexandra, or perhaps Anastasia, but that name would be taken from her along with everything else before she was even old enough to understand what was happening. Because one day when she was just a teenager, some historians say 14, some say 15, the Crimean Tatars came. They swept through her village on horseback, burning and raiding and taking. And they took her, chained her, marched her hundreds of miles to the great slave markets of the Ottoman Empire, where human beings were bought and sold as casually as livestock. She arrived in Constantinople, the glittering, terrifying capital of the most powerful empire on earth, as property, as nobody, as a girl with no name, no family, no future, and no hope. Or so everyone thought. She was purchased for the imperial harem. Now, when most people hear the word harem, they picture something from a fantasy, silks and jewels and romance. The reality was something far more brutal. The Ottoman imperial harem was a closed world of thousands of women, all competing for the attention of one man, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the most powerful ruler on the planet. Most of these women lived and died in that harem without ever once speaking to the Sultan. They were background figures, decorations, possessions. They had no voice, no power, no future beyond the walls of the palace. The harem was ruled by the Sultan's mother, the wielded Sultan, a formidable woman named Hürrem Sultan who controlled every detail of life inside those walls. And the harem already had a favorite. Her name was Mahidevran, and she had already given Suleiman a son named Mustafa, which in the Ottoman world meant she was virtually untouchable. The hierarchy was clear. The rules were established. There was absolutely no room, no space, no possibility for a skinny, red-haired, green-eyed slave girl from a Ukrainian village to change any of it. And yet, she changed all of it. Her name in the harem became Hürrem. It is a Persian word. It means the joyful one or she who laughs. And that tells you something extraordinary right there, because in a place built on silence, submission, and survival, this girl laughed. She sang, she danced. She lit up every room she entered with an energy that nobody in that palace had ever encountered before. She learned Turkish at a speed that astonished everyone around her. She studied, she read. She absorbed the language, the culture, the religion, the politics, everything, with a hunger and an intelligence that was almost frightening. While other harem girls spent their days in idle competition and jealousy, Hürrem was educating herself, building herself, preparing herself for what she may not have known yet. But she was ready when the moment came. And the moment came in the form of Sultan Suleiman himself. Suleiman the Magnificent was not an ordinary man, and this was not an ordinary attraction. He was the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, ruler of a domain that stretched from Hungary to Persia, from North Africa to the Arabian Peninsula. He was a poet, a lawmaker, a military genius. He had conquered Belgrade, Rhodes, and Budapest. Emperors feared him. Popes prayed against him. He was, by any measure, the most powerful human being alive in the 16th century. And when he met Hürrem, this laughing, red-haired, impossibly sharp-minded slave girl, he was completely and utterly undone. He fell in love with her. Not the polite political kind of love that sultans were supposed to feel. Real love, desperate, consuming, poetry-writing love. He wrote her verses. He sent her gifts. He sought her out above all the other women in his enormous harem. And Hürrem, brilliant, calculating, emotionally intelligent Hürrem, understood exactly what this meant. This was not just romance. This was power, and she intended to use it. But standing between Hürrem and everything she wanted were obstacles that would have destroyed any other woman. First there was Mahidevran, the established favorite, the mother of the crown prince, a woman with years of seniority and the backing of the entire traditional harem structure. The rivalry between them was vicious and real. Historical records describe a physical confrontation in which Mahidevran attacked Hürrem, scratching her face and pulling her hair, screaming that Hürrem was nothing but a piece of sold meat. Hürrem, bleeding, disheveled, chose not to hide. She went directly to Suleiman and presented herself exactly as she was, and she told him calmly that she was unworthy to appear before him in this condition because of what had been done to her. It was a masterclass in emotional strategy. Suleiman was furious at Mahidevran. From that moment forward, the balance of power in the harem shifted permanently. Then there was Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's closest friend, his grand vizier, the second most powerful man in the empire, and a man who despised Hürrem and feared her influence over the Sultan. Ibrahim was charming, brilliant, deeply embedded in Suleiman's affections, and he worked quietly and consistently to undermine her. And then there was the entire institution of the Ottoman Sultanate itself, centuries of tradition, law, and custom that said a sultan could not marry a slave, could not give a concubine the rights of a wife, could not allow any one woman to hold permanent official power. Every rule, every tradition, every expectation of the empire stood against what Hürrem wanted, and she dismantled every single one of them. First, she did something no woman in the history of the Ottoman harem had ever done. She converted to Islam, not just as a formality, but deeply, genuinely, and visibly. This was strategic as much as it was personal. As a Muslim woman, her position changed. Her rights changed. Her legal standing changed. Then came the moment that made the entire Ottoman world tremble with shock. Suleiman freed her. He granted her the status of a free woman, something almost unheard of for a harem concubine. And then, in a move that shattered 4 centuries of Ottoman tradition and sent shockwaves through every court in Europe, he married her officially, legally, with a wedding celebration that the whole city of Constantinople witnessed. For the first time in Ottoman history, a sultan had taken a former slave as his legal wife. The traditionalists were horrified. The foreign ambassadors were baffled. The gossip spread across Europe like wildfire. People said she had bewitched him, that she was a sorceress, that she had used dark magic to make the great Suleiman lose his mind. They called her Roxolana, the Russian woman in European accounts, and they whispered that she was dangerous, manipulative, unnatural. They were right that she was dangerous. They were right that she was powerful. But it wasn't magic. It was intelligence. It was strategy. And it was a love so genuine and so consuming that Suleiman himself in his poetry compared her to his very soul. Now she moved into the next phase of her plan. Because Hürrem understood something that most people in that palace did not, that informal influence was fragile, but institutional power was permanent. She began involving herself in the political affairs of the empire in ways no woman had ever attempted before. She corresponded directly with foreign rulers, the King of Poland, the Shah of Persia, writing letters in her own name, building diplomatic relationships, inserting herself into the international conversation as a political actor in her own right. She used her position to fund the construction of mosques, schools, hospitals, and public bathhouses across the empire. The great Haseki Sultan complex in Constantinople, which still stands today, bears her name and her legacy in stone. She became a figure of genuine public power, not just private influence. She shaped policy. She influenced appointments. She built networks of loyalty throughout the palace and the government that extended her reach into every corner of the empire. And through all of it, the building, the diplomacy, the politics, she was also a mother. She gave Suleiman 6 children, 5 sons and a daughter, and here is where the story takes its darkest and most devastating turn. In the Ottoman system, when a sultan died, his sons went to war with each other for the throne. It was brutal, bloody, and understood by everyone. The winner became sultan. The losers died. Hürrem had 5 sons. But Mahidevran's son, Shehzade Mustafa, Suleiman's firstborn, the crown prince, was the favorite of the army, beloved by the Janissaries, respected across the empire. He was older, more experienced, more established, and if Mustafa became sultan when Suleiman died, every single one of Hürrem's sons would be killed. It was not cruelty. It was Ottoman law. It was simply how things worked. Hürrem could not allow it, and so she did what she had always done. She outmaneuvered everyone, working with her son-in-law Rustem Pasha, who had by this point replaced Ibrahim Pasha as Grand Vizier, Ibrahim himself having been executed by Suleiman in 1536, a fall from grace that many historians connect to Hürrem's quiet work against him. She planted seeds of suspicion in Suleiman's mind about Mustafa, rumors, evidence possibly fabricated, whispers that Mustafa was planning to overthrow his own father. Suleiman, aging suspicious, his trust eroded, summoned his son. And in 1553, Shehzade Mustafa arrived at his father's camp, walked into the royal tent and was strangled by the Sultan's own executioners on Suleiman's order. The most beloved prince in the Ottoman Empire died on his father's command. The Janissaries wept openly in their camps. The people mourned, and the path to the throne for Hürrem's sons was cleared. Whether Hürrem orchestrated Mustafa's death or merely benefited from the paranoia she helped cultivate is a question historians still debate. But what is not debated is that she was the one who understood, better than anyone, that in this world, sentiment was a luxury she could not afford. She never got to see which of her sons would ultimately take the throne. Hurrem Sultan died in April of 1558 after a long illness. She was somewhere between 50 and 60 years old. Suleiman was devastated. He had a magnificent mausoleum built for her in the garden of the Suleymaniye Mosque, one of the most beautiful buildings in all of Constantinople, and he visited her tomb regularly until his own death 8 years later. He never remarried. He never took another official wife. He never by any account got over her. After his death, he was buried in a mausoleum directly beside hers, so that even in death, the greatest sultan in Ottoman history lay next to the slave girl who had become his queen. Their son Selim II eventually took the throne, making Hürrem in the end the mother of an empire. And what is her legacy? She is called a villain by some, a manipulative schemer who destroyed a noble prince and corrupted a great sultan. She is called a heroine by others, a woman who was given nothing, who came from nothing, who built everything with nothing but her own mind and will and courage. The truth is probably more complicated and more interesting than either version. She was a survivor who became a strategist, a slave who became a queen, a woman in a world designed specifically to silence women, who made more noise than almost anyone in the history of that world. Today she is a national symbol in Ukraine, where the village of Rohatyn honors her memory with a statue. In Turkey, she is one of the most famous and debated figures in all of Ottoman history. The television series Magnificent Century, which dramatized her life, became one of the most watched shows in the history of Turkish television, broadcast in over 60 countries and seen by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Her slave girl from a forgotten Ukrainian village, watched by hundreds of millions of people, 5 centuries after her death. She arrived in Constantinople in chains. She left it as its queen. They called her a witch because they couldn't understand how a woman with nothing could take everything. But there was no magic. There was only a girl who refused, absolutely, completely, ferociously refused, to accept the life the world had assigned to her. Every chain they put on her, she turned into a weapon. Every wall they built around her, she learned to see over. Every rule they used to contain her, she quietly, patiently, brilliantly dismantled. The next time someone tells you that your starting point determines your ending point, remember Hurrem Sultan. Remember the slave girl who became a sultan's queen, a diplomat, a philanthropist, a mother of empires, and one of the most powerful human beings of the 16th century. Remember that she started with nothing, absolutely nothing, and she changed everything.